Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 26 mini-series with the Los Angeles Angels. Thanks for joining us, whether you're new to the channel or a long-time watcher. I like to do a lot of Out of the Park Baseball playthroughs on Old School Sports, and we also do occasional tutorial videos sharing what we've learned by playing the game and interacting with our loyal viewers and commenters, also known as the Worldwide Scouting Department. Just completed a long-running series, 260 episodes with the Oakland Athletics in OOTP 25. This adventure with the Angels is not going to be quite that long. Typically, after a new release of the game, which we just got with OOTP 26 yesterday, we do a mini-series for a few weeks while we are learning the new game. Some of the features that we're most interested in digging into in this series are the player development lab enhancements and the new feature around the draft combine. So hopefully we'll be exploring those in a little bit of detail in the coming episodes and learning more about them. And then we also wait a few weeks for the inevitable bugs and tweaks that need to be made to the game to be ironed out before we will begin a long play series. So the Angels are a team that we have been considering for our long play series for the last few years. Not going with them again this season, but we will play them for the next few weeks in real time and hopefully get through several seasons to help turn the Angels' fortunes around. This is a team that over the last couple of years, many of you have suggested is a good team. I've had it in my 10 challenging teams to consider in OOTP videos that I've put out. And even as recently as yesterday, Gilbert Gonzalez suggested this is a team that we might want to play for the long term. So it's not going to be the long play, Gilbert, but we are going to be learning a lot more about the Angels in the next few weeks. And in this episode, we're just going to dig into the Angels for a couple of weeks, hopefully make some roster changes after we evaluate the roster, and then move forward to the start of the season. Really, when I take over a team like this, I'd love to make wholesale changes across the organization, including not just players at the major league level, but minor leaguers, major league coaches, minor league coaches, scouts, trainers, etc. But typically, I found it most effective to do that stuff after the first season. So although we certainly want to help the Angels improve from their sickly 63-99 record a year ago, the main focus is going to be over the next 6 or 7 months of game time, just trying to improve the roster on the margins, improve the team's financial situation, and then set ourselves up so that next offseason we can begin making some more wholesale changes to the front office and leadership of the team, and then ultimately also to the players who are going to win or lose for us on the field. If you enjoy this type of content and you're new to the channel, I would really appreciate a subscription and a thumbs up if you like the video, and always love to interact in the comments with the members of the Worldwide Scouting Department. So why do we think the Angels are a good challenge in OOTP? Well, you can see it right here in the bottom left of your screen, trying to avoid a 10th consecutive losing season, and that pitiful .389 winning percentage last year was the worst season for the Angels in this run of 10 or 9 consecutive losing seasons that we'll be trying to avoid making 10 this year. A positive trait is that you do have an owner who's willing to spend some money, but the Angels have definitely not spent that money well over the last decade, and Artie Moreno is demanding in terms of his patience, so you're going to have to turn it around relatively quickly. Can also see he already expects us to achieve a winning record, despite that's something his team hasn't done since 2015. Big challenge with the Angels is a very mediocre farm system. You can see just 2 top 100 prospects. Ranks 22nd according to OOTP. If you'd looked at most of the minor league rankings by various baseball writers and media establishments, the Angels in recent years have often ranked as the most poorly regarded farm system in all of baseball, and there's certainly some who have them with that ranking as this 2025 season approaches. As I mentioned, you do have a big budget, ranked tied for 11th overall with Artie Moreno, and the player payroll in the top 10. Fan interest, very mediocre at this point, unfortunately. This is a team that, as we've talked about, has performed poorly on the field for the last decade. They let their superstar, Shohei Ohtani, move to a team in the same city, in the Los Angeles Dodgers. I'd be more critical of the Angels for doing that if you couldn't say the same thing about my team, the New York Yankees, and what happened with Juan Soto this past offseason. Although the budget is big, some real significant issues salary-wise. Anthony Rendon, first and foremost among them, torn hip flexor tendon. He does not play much, and in recent years he has not played well in the limited time that he has played. Also a guy who, at least in the game, not the best clubhouse influence. And certainly if you look at some of the comments Rendon has made over the last couple years around his injuries, I think it's fair to say that there in Los Angeles is some degree of fan dissatisfaction with him as well. Honestly, at this point, with Rendon out until early 2026 and in the final year of that $38 million contract, would love to get it off the books as soon as possible. I don't think it's going to be possible unless we retain a massive amount of that contract. But when we look at Rendon's ratings, he's got no power left, contact only average, decent eye. He's an okay defensive third baseman who's not a great influence in the clubhouse, and he's wrecked physically. Even if we have to keep a big chunk of that contract for the rest of this year when he's going to give us nothing in 2026, I think we're willing to do it. The other huge long contract is Mike Trout. Fragile physically, so always a risk of injury for him, but still world-class home run power and an excellent eye with a very good glove and very good speed when he is healthy. Interestingly, starting the new game, we have a very low scouting accuracy on the guy who has been a dynamic player for our organization for a decade at this point, which is kind of interesting. I do like, though, that you don't really know the personality ratings in this new version of the game until you get the scouting accuracy higher. That's a little tweak, but a nice feature that I like that makes a little bit of sense. I think we run with Trout for the time being. He's so good defensively that we probably do play him in center field, which will increase the chance of nagging injuries popping up now and then. There's an argument to be made that you just try to dump Trout as well. I'm not at that point quite yet, but we'll see how the next year or two go. Kikuchi is our ace at this point after being signed. We'll see if he can be effective for us this year at $21.2 million. Looking at his profile, probably overpaid. We've got him for at least next year and then a player option for the final season. Thinking about the salaries on this team, the thing that's a little interesting is that we're $195 million this year. We only dropped by $10 million to $185 next year, even though we've got 5 or 6 guys who will be leaving as free agents if we don't extend them and add more to the payroll. And that's part of the reason why I think getting Rendon's contract off the books for next season would be a great thing for us to try to do. As I noted, I don't think it's possible we're going to get the whole contract off the books. In fact, I'll take a look right now. I'm sure I'm going to be very disappointed here, shopping a 34-year-old making a ton of money who's wrecked physically and is injured for over a year is almost certainly going to get a very minimal reaction. In fact, I know that no one's going to be interested if we don't retain some of his contract. Honestly, I'm a little worried that even retaining 50% of his contract, there's not really going to be any interest out there for Rendon. Yeah, you can see no one offers anything in return for him at 50%. If we up it to 80%, nothing as well. So, if we keep 100% of Anthony Rendon's contract, we can get a couple of relatively useless and high-paid veterans in return. So that's going to be something for me to investigate going forward before we finish this episode. Won't bore you with the details right now, but might just have to suck it up and keep him on the roster this year and then hope that maybe this time next year when he's closer to being healthy, there will be more demand for him. But realistically, March and April of next year, when he's closer to healthy or actually healthy, any team with the ability to take on a $38 million contract probably is going to have spent that money on other people. So we're going to be in a situation a year from now also where we'd need to retain a big chunk of that contract, unfortunately. So a lot to think about as we start moving through this last couple of weeks before the season gets underway. And before we start checking out our roster, which we're going to do before we make any significant trades or start looking to perhaps spend the little bit of money that we have left on the guys that are left here on March 14th, 2025 in free agency, take a quick look at our scout. And actually decent in terms of his ratings, good at scouting major leaguers and international players, outstanding at minor leaguers, and legendary with amateurs. But he is a favorability type scout, and we tend to prefer those who are a little more focused on a player's potential. So we could be looking to make a change there this upcoming off season. Taking a look at the roster now, and you can see we don't have a very high scouting accuracy on many of our players here as the game gets underway. The rotation, pretty uninspiring. We talked about Kikuchi already, overpaid for what he is, but at least a respectable starter. Can say the same thing about Reed Detmers, not a number 2 on a good team, but he's at least a representative major league pitcher. And the same thing goes with Jose Soriano, a 26-year-old who's coming off of a solid season a year ago, and a player who we think could perhaps be part of our medium-term future here in Los Angeles. The rest of the rotation, a little sketchier. Tyler Anderson making $13 million as a left-handed starter. Certainly isn't worth that money. Don't know that there's going to be a lot of demand for him, but is a guy we certainly would not bring back next season. Was respectable last year, a 10-15 record with a 3.81 ERA, a WAR of close to 1 for the Angels, but definitely not worth $13 million with the way he looks. Chase Silseth, younger guy, don't think he's a big-time player, but certainly would not hate it if we could move him up to the 4th spot in the rotation if we got something for Anderson. Although we're a 63-win team that's had 9 consecutive losing seasons, the Angels felt that they really needed a $10 million closer. So they went out and got Kenley Jansen this past offseason. Just a 1-year deal. Certainly somebody, if he has any value, we could look to move on from closer to the All-Star break. I do like Ben Joyce, as I touched upon earlier. I think the 24-year-old could be an important part of this bullpen for years to come. The lefties, Brock Burke, he's a fine major league left-handed reliever. Not that exciting, coming off of obviously a rough time in Texas before he was with the Angels last year. Jose Suarez, definitely will keep him on the team. The 27-year-old is a guy who could start for us in a pinch. Wouldn't expect him to be incredibly effective, but he at least has the stamina to give us 5 or 6 innings on occasion. And the last lefty, at least among our middle relievers, Garrett McDaniels, 25-year-old who looks like he can be a respectable major league reliever. And this whole setup, as far as who's on the 26-man roster and the starting rotation and the bullpen assignments, all came from Ron Washington and was the default when I opened up this game a few moments ago. Clearly, we'll be also changing some of these guys who are on the 26-man roster and how we're going to use them before the season starts. Righty Kyle Hendricks, 35-year-old veteran, a guy we would happily move on from. Not making a ton of money, $2.5 million, but he's also not really, at this point, a big-time major league pitcher. Hans Kraus, younger. I don't love the lack of control. Those of you who have followed me over the years know that I hate walks, at least when I am on the pitching and defense side of them. So he's a guy who, although he's cheap, maybe we look to move on at some point. And the lefty, Jose Quijada, even worse in terms of his control, making a little over $1 million, set to be making $2.5 million next year. Definitely a contract that if we can get off the books. I don't like guys who walk 17 batters in 19 1/3 innings, even if they do have outstanding strikeout rates. So a pretty uninspiring pitching staff when all is said and done. A few pieces that we could potentially build around, likes of Soriano, Ben Joyce, some of the other relievers, even Detmers as well. So there's some talent here, but I wouldn't say in the most case that it's particularly high-level talent. And as we talked about over the near term, moving on from some of the pitchers with lower control, and then some of the more expensive pitchers like Anderson and Hendricks, who just don't have very good stuff anymore, is probably the way that I would be inclined to proceed. One pitcher on the IL, Robert Stevenson, a very expensive reliever, set to make $11 million this year and next year. Does have perhaps the best stuff out of anyone in our organization. Recovering from a torn UCL and Tommy John, should be ready maybe sometime in May after a rehab assignment. I think he'll certainly be a nice addition to the bullpen. But again, similar to my comments on $10 million for Kenley Jansen, we've got a 63-win team that's got 9 straight losing seasons. Just not sure whether the luxury of an $11 million setup man is something that this Angels squad can afford. Turning to our position players, and I think there's a little more upside here than perhaps we saw with the pitching staff. We've got the apostrophe boys, Travis d'Arnaud and Logan O'Hoppe at catcher. D'Arnaud, a little better defensively, good influence in the clubhouse, not much of a bat at this point. Making $6 million. We've got a team option for next year. Presumably we're not going to spend $6 million on a 37-year-old backup catcher, so probably his last and only season with us. Logan O'Hoppe, not quite as good defensively, but does have some pop in that bat. He'll be the starting catcher for the time being. Generally prefer to have good defense at catcher, and it looks like O'Hoppe is the definition of major league average in terms of his defense. But for the time being, at least hopefully he'll provide some offense for us. Ryan Noda, a little bit of power and a really good eye. Doesn't bring much to the table defensively. A competent first baseman / left field type. If the bat is productive, we can keep him around. But this is a guy who hit a .137 in the majors with the Oakland A's last year, now just known as the Athletics. Nolan Schanuel, more important potential part of our future. The 23-year-old was solid with the Angels as a rookie last year. Really like his ability to get on base. Hope he continues to grow into slightly above average power. Not great defensively, but as a first baseman or DH, a left fielder, probably someone who will be an important player for us in this series. Can say the same thing about Taylor Ward, only from the right-hand side of the plate, a little bit older, but a competent major league bat, and another guy who is a first baseman, DH, or left fielder, probably has a role to play for us going forward. The infield is a bit of a mess right now, primarily due to some injuries. Utility infielder, we've got Scott Kingery, and he can play all over the field, does have some speed, good influence in the clubhouse, but the bat is problematic, to say the least, for a major leaguer. Kevin Newman penciled in at second base, another guy who's versatile, capable defensively, good personality, just not really a very good major league hitter at this point, although he did put up a 90 WRC plus for Arizona last year. Looking at his profile, I think it'll be tough for him to get to that level with us, with the Angels, making $2.5 million, and he'll be a free agent after this season. Yoan Moncada, a pretty average major league third baseman at this point. With the injury to Rendon, he's our guy, making $5 million for this year, and then he will likely be headed to free agency and presumably be a one-year guy with us. And you can say the same thing about Tim Anderson, a guy who was an all-star not all that long ago, Silver Slugger not all that long ago, still a capable defensive player, but the bat at this point is pretty dreadful. Hit .214 with a 30 WRC plus for Miami a year ago. And the 31-year-old who once looked like he was almost a potential blossoming star in the major leagues has definitely become a journeyman. And that journey is going to be continuing for Anderson with the Angels this year. We do have some good infield talent on the IL. Rendon, I would not put in that packet. He has had his times in his career and obviously did enough to earn that massive contract from the Angels that unfortunately, due to injuries, he has not come close to living up to. Going to look to move on from him. But Zach Neto, a very important part of our future, out for another couple months with a torn labrum. Solid defensively, good speed, and a bat that we think could be above average. It certainly was last year in the 155 games that he played before he suffered that shoulder injury. And Luis Rengifo out with a strained hammy, another versatile defensive player who can play all over the infield, the corner outfield spots, decent on the base paths. Not a great bat. Guy who's making close to $6 million and a switch hitter, and presumably when Rengifo is healthy, that could make the likes of either Kingery or Newman, perhaps even Moncada, have less of a chance to stick with this team. The outfield is actually a bit better, in my opinion, than the infield. Jorge Soler still has the home run power and still has a very good eye. Not great defensively, making $13 million this year and set to make $13 million next year. Likely a contract that we'd prefer to get out of perhaps before next season, but he is a guy who we think can hit some home runs for us this year, so probably for the time being in the mix. You know about Trout. We're going to try to make it work with Kidd. We'll see what happens. See if we can keep him healthy. Joe Adell, another guy with good home run power, certainly more competent defensively than Soler. Think we're more likely to keep him around. He's only 25 years old, not making a ton of money. And then last but not least, Mickey Moniak, probably going to be a fourth or fifth outfielder for us. Decent speed, good in the clubhouse, solid defensively. The bat's not great, but he does give us a left-handed pinch hitter off the bench. So if we were to move on from anyone in the outfield, I think it's most likely going to be Mr. Soler. If you're wondering about the settings, I'll do a deep dive. Well, I don't know a deep dive, but I'll do a dive into the settings when I start my long play. Honestly, people always ask about the settings, and I'm not someone who tweaks all that much off of the base settings in OOTP. For this series, just a couple of things that I did. Obviously, you can see that I've got the personality listed here, so I checked the button to turn that on. And I also cranked the trade difficulty up from the base settings. But other than that, didn't really change much of anything for this game. We'll likely tweak a little bit more for the long play, and I will talk about it when we begin that in a few weeks. But for now, I want to kind of play the base version of the game and learn as much about it as I can in that context. So that hopefully will help educate me a little more on Eddie's settings that I do want to perhaps tweak for the long play version. And the last thing I want to do before I start trying to make some of these trades on the margins to open up some spots on the roster, clean up our financial situation, and ultimately improve the team a little bit is to check what's available on the free agent market. I don't know if it's the same in every game, but if Jesus Rodriguez is available at the start of your game, seems like someone who might be worth taking a flyer on. 18-year-old who we think could be a pretty interesting contact hitter, left-handed hitting, outfielder. Looks like he was released by the Cubs back at the beginning of February. At least according to our scout, someone with decent potential. So we're certainly going to offer a minor league contract to Jesus Rodriguez to hopefully help bolster our minor league system. Not a ton of talent out there, and I do like, as I noted, that if you have low scouting accuracy on people, you don't really know their personalities. That's just one of these little tweaks to the game this year that seems more realistic. I guess while I'm looking at hitters, it would make sense to put the hitters' ratings up here. And one other thing that I did do is I did try to tweak all my views back to the views that I'm used to. So I spent some time on that when I started the game. Austin Meadows, interesting to me to perhaps add into the outfield mix, would give us a left-handed hitter that, unlike Moniak, might actually be starting for us. Good influence in the clubhouse. We think he still looks like a respectable major league player, but obviously haven't seen him at the major league level in some time at this point. A few other guys who are out there. Anthony Alford. The defense is attractive, the speed is attractive, but the bad personality and the weak bat make him less interesting to me. Could look to perhaps try to upgrade at backup catcher right now. The Tasmanian Devil is making a little too much money to be a realistic target at $5.5 million, but would be a better blocker and framer than anyone we have on the team, and also give us a captain personality with a switch hitter who's still at least a competent offensive player. There's others out there as well. No one that's going to be a total difference maker. Pitching-wise, similar. Some guys to think about. Humberto Castellanos, 26-year-old, really good control. The stuff and movement not special. Very bland 4-pitch arsenal. But Castellanos is a guy who's only looking for a minor league contract at this point, so perhaps think about bringing him into the organization. Jose De Leon. If we did end up being able to move on from Anderson or some of the other starters, he's a decent option to bring into the organization. So we'll certainly make a minor league offer to him. Relief pitcher-wise, Yency Almonte doesn't have great control, but certainly better than some of the guys who I was mentioning that we might move on from. Still looking for $1.5 million right now, so probably not a guy we would chase all that aggressively. No one that's going to be a true difference maker is available on the free agent market at this point, unfortunately. But I think there are guys around who, particularly with this Angels team, could be fighting for a spot on the 26-man roster in a couple of weeks, and at the very least give us some more organizational depth down in AAA for when we have those inevitable injuries. So there are definitely some guys we'd like to try to move on from. We're not going to be able to clear a ton of money, given that even if we do move on from Rendon, we're going to be retaining a huge chunk of that contract. But my hope is that we can make the team a little better on the margin and free up a little bit of money. Not that there's a ton to spend it on in free agency, but our scouting and player development budgets right now are very close to baseline, and would not mind if those ended up being a bit higher for next season, or for this upcoming season and next season, of course. So we're going to spend some time offline perusing the free agent market a little more aggressively, and also really digging in deep to the trade market. Would love to get Rendon off the books completely, but I have a feeling even in a best case scenario, we're going to be retaining probably 80% plus of that contract for this year and next year. But given that right now we're responsible for 100% of it, and we're expecting 0 from him this year and a minimal contribution next year, I think it still might be the right thing to do. And as you'll remember, there were only 2 players in all of baseball that we could get back for Rendon if we kept all of his contract. One of them was the minor league reliever who's making major league money, Chris Stratton, with the Kansas City organization. And we had been able to get them down to retaining 75% of Kansas City, of Rendon's contract as we worked through a deal. We decided to submit it to them, retaining 70%, and fortunately they went for it. So in addition to sending Rendon for the final 2 years of his deal to the Royals, we had to send minor league reliever Joel Hurtado, a Double-A pitcher for us. Decent prospect, but that lack of control made him expendable as far as I'm concerned. Also 24 years old, so not a big-time prospect. 26-year-old first baseman Nico Cavadas, good power and a good eye, but some negative personality traits as far as influence on others, with the low loyalty and being a bit greedy in terms of wanting to get paid, and also a guy who struggles to make contact and strikes out an insane amount of times. Ryan Noda, honestly a very similar profile, even better eye, not quite as bad in terms of the strikeouts, but a 28-year-old left-handed first base DH type who's not a big part of our future. And then we had to include 22-year-old minor leaguer Chris Cortez. Some negative personality traits and the lack of control there. We're happy to include him. So ultimately, we're still going to be spending, more than $25 million a year on Rendon for these next couple seasons. But we will free up a decent amount of money. So we are going to go ahead and complete that trade. Rendon is off the books. Noda, Stratton, the other primary major league guys changing teams in this, and then we're also sending them Cavadas, Hurtado, and Cortez, as I mentioned. Does put us in a better position where we've got a little more money available now, and you can see we're retaining $26.6 million of that contract for the next couple seasons. So ultimately we did open up for next year little over $11 million that we'll be able to spend next season. Don't think we could have done much better than that with a guy who this time next year is still going to be recovering from that injury. So it is what it is. Opens up a little money for us. We are now committed to the major league money for Mr. Stratton, which at $4.5 million for his profile is not all that attractive. But at least it's just a one-year deal, and then we move on from Stratton next year, whereas we'll be saving a little over $11 million on Rendon's contract next season by getting him off the books. And we've also made a number of offers, minor league contracts to players. All are pure minor league contracts except for Austin Meadows, who we did offer him $1.2 million if he makes the major league roster. He was asking for 1.5, you might remember. So everyone else just looking to bolster our organization and perhaps backfill a little bit in the higher levels for some of those guys that we just got rid of in that trade to get Rendon off of the books. No one who's going to be a huge difference maker, but some guys with some good personalities, and would not be shocked if we see some of these players on the 26-man roster. If not when we break camp in a few weeks, then certainly at some point over the course of this season. And another real minor trade we're going to do. We mentioned that the reliever Jose Quijada and his lack of control was not someone we wanted to have on the team. And particularly with the acquisition of Stratton, we've got someone who's hopefully a little more capable for our bullpen. So we're going to trade for Samad Taylor, who's on a minor league contract. Certainly not a big-time player, but if we need him, he's got some speed. And he's competent defensively at a number of positions, even though he does not have much of a bat. We have to retain 35% of Quijada's contract for this year, which is almost $400,000, but still ultimately save $700,000 this year by getting the guarantee for Quijada off the books, since Taylor is on a minor league deal. So we're going to go ahead and complete that trade as well. Nothing very exciting going on here, but in mid-March, there's not necessarily a ton of options. The players we're trying to get rid of aren't all that attractive, and most teams don't have a ton of payroll and roster flexibility at this point. And I have shopped another one of the guys I mentioned, Jorge Soler. I think he's a potentially important bat for us, although unlikely part of our medium-term future. And positively, there's decent demand for him. We're not going to get a superstar in return, but there's definitely a lot of interest in him. Unfortunately, for most of these players right now, we've got low scouting accuracy. So given that we're in the very early stages of this playthrough, and it does seem like Soler is a guy who can help us this year, but also potentially have some value to a contender as we get closer to the trade deadline, which would, importantly for us, get that $13 million off the books for next year. I think we're going to take our time with him and kind of have him in the lineup and on the roster as the season begins, and then as our scout gets up to speed on more and more of the player universe here in OOTP 26, maybe consider offloading him come June or July if there's a interesting player who can be a bigger part of our future available for him at that point. And we've also, as we've played around with things, realized that we've got Evan White on an $8 million contract that he got in arbitration sitting in AAA for us. And unfortunately, Evan White is so undesirable to everybody else that even if we retained 100% of his contract, no one would offer a single player in return. So that, unfortunately, is just a sunk cost for this season. Fortunately, we've got a team option at $10 million next year that we will almost certainly be declining, which will help us open up some additional money. So as we think about salaries, made a little bit of progress getting rid of 30% of Rendon's contract. Still going to explore moving on from Soler and Stevenson when he's ultimately healthy. No trade market at all for Tyler Anderson, not surprisingly, at $13 million. We'll have to see how Kikuchi does, as I mentioned, moving on from White, possibly moving on from Darno next year. And Taylor Ward will be a tough call for us. A lot of less expensive arbitration-eligible players who could be back next year with us, but you can see we've cut next year's obligations down to $170 million. I wish it was $170,000. And there's definitely potential to easily free up another $16 million between White and Darno. And as I mentioned, Soler and Stevenson could free up another $24 million between the two of them. So not that we're going to be huge players in free agency this upcoming offseason, but we definitely should be in a situation where if there's one guy out there that we really want next offseason, we definitely should have the funds to bring him on board. But unfortunately, the overall message is, not surprisingly, there's not a lot of demand for some of our older players in their late 20s, early 30s, making, $5, $10, $15 million a year. So just going to have to suck it up over the near to medium term and try to work out of these contracts as best as we can. And we haven't done much else as we close in on the start of the regular season, starting to get back some of the scouting reports that we've requested to get to know our team a little bit better. One change this year, and kind of interesting, it seems like over the last year or two there's been a little bit of a pushback, at least in the United States, against political correctness or wokery or whatever you will call it. And we saw that a little bit last year in OOTP when they changed a category from greed to the somewhat less pejorative financial ambition. And another change this year used to have players that either had high or low intelligence, and that is now high or low baseball IQ, because we definitely don't want to offend the imaginary players who may not have as good instincts on the baseball field as others. So interesting to see that. Not going to be a ton of changes to our 26-man roster to the defaults that we talked about earlier. Probably will be some, though. Obviously, there will be some, since we've traded away some players who were on that roster, most notably Quintana. And we brought Mr. Stratton on board, but we're going to figure out those final edits that we're going to make, and then we'll see the 26-man roster that we are going to head to Los Angeles with to get this season underway. And not a ton of changes to the 13 pitchers we're going to be bringing north with us. The rotation, as expected, Kikuchi, Detmers, Soriano, Anderson, and Silseth. Anderson likely will not be back with us next year. Didn't seem like he had much value in the trade market, but if that changes, certainly a contract we wouldn't mind getting off the books earlier rather than later. Jansen will be our closer, Ben Joyce the setup man. Jose Suarez, Garrett McDaniels, Jose De Leon, who we signed to a minor league contract, and Brock Burke as our middle relievers, and then Hendricks in long relief along with Chris Stratton, who we picked up in that salary dump of Rendon. Had to take on Stratton's contract for this season, but he will likely not be with us in 2026. And only one change as far as the 13 position players that we're bringing to Los Angeles with us. And you may remember we traded away the first baseman, Mr. Noda, in the deal that got Rendon off the books. So if we're going to be spending a guaranteed $8 million on Evan White this year, he's going to be primarily sitting on our bench at the major league level. The soon-to-be 29-year-old very unlikely will exercise his team option next year for $10 million. In fact, I can pretty much guarantee you that we won't, despite his defensive prowess. No real surprises in the starting lineup. We did change the order of the batting order a bit. We don't have a great solution for leadoff. We honestly don't have a great solution for most spots in the batting order here, but Moncada going to be our third baseman and leadoff hitter. Taylor Ward will DH for us. Shawnell will be at first base. Trout, of course, cleanup hitter, center fielder for us. Jorge Soler will play left. Joe Adell right. Logan O'Hoppe, the catcher, will bat seventh, followed by the second baseman and shortstop, Kevin Newman and Tim Anderson, respectively. Switch it up a little bit against left-handed pitching, and we put Shawnell ahead of Ward in the 2 and 3 spots, flip-flop those two. Off the bench at catcher, we've got Travis as our backup catcher, Evan White, who we've talked about, and Scott Kingery as utility infielders, and then Mickey Moniak is our utility outfielder. Didn't really see anyone with strong platoon splits, so a bit disappointing that we just have the switch hitter Moncada and the lefty Shawnell as our only guys who will be hitting left-handed against right-handed pitching. Just didn't feel that Moniak's bat, even against right-handed pitching for a corner outfielder, was good enough to get him into the lineup on a regular basis over Trout, Soler, Odell, or Ward in those outfield and DH roles. But hopefully he'll be a useful pinch hitter and outfielder when those guys need a day rest. We're certainly going to be cautious with Trout. We haven't changed our strategy settings yet, but certainly when Trout starts getting down to the low 90s in terms of his fatigue, and we're going to be real conservative with him. Rest him when he's at 93%, so he'll be missing some days, but if we can somehow get 120, 130 games out of Trout this year and avoid any significant injuries, that would obviously be a huge victory. And given the home run power in the eye that he still has, I think that he'll be a pretty useful player if we can just ensure that we get him in the lineup more often than not. So we've changed the roster just a bit. We've saved some money, which has allowed us to bolster scouting and player development a bit. And we are in a situation where next year we've freed up a little bit of potential money. And as we've talked about, as we think about next year, guys like Evan White, Travis d'Arnaud, Jorge Soler, Robert Stevenson, maybe even Kikuchi's contracts are certainly in doubt. You would think even when we get into some of the lower priced people, Scott Kingery, perhaps Mickey Moniak, if he's going to be a utility outfielder. Those are other guys we might be looking to trade away or move on from. So not a great situation with a roster that we don't love and a team that hasn't had a winning season since actually Barack Obama was still in the White House, and that's saying a lot at this point since we've had 3 presidential administrations since then at this point. But hopefully we can come out of this season with a team that wins somewhat more than 63 games. Hopefully we can come out of this season with enough money to spend that we can be a player at the top end of the market in free agency, even if it's only for one guy. Certainly would love to add another impact player in to support Mike Trout, whether it's a position player or just a top-end pitcher. And certainly a lot can change between now and the end of the season. But when we look at the upcoming free agents on the batting side, definitely are some interesting players, most notably Vlad Guerrero Jr. You can see we don't know a lot about all of these people, so we're going to be focused this season on getting to know all of them better. Pitching-wise, when we think about the 2025 to 26 offseason, a lot of interesting pitchers potentially going to be there as well. Dylan Cease certainly would be someone very interesting to consider adding into the rotation. A lot of guys in the bullpen as well potentially out there. But we've got a whole season that we're going to need to play before we get to that point. Hopefully we will know a lot more about all of these potential free agents by that point, and we'll be able to make good decisions. Thinking ahead, as I mentioned, going to spend a decent amount of time probably in our next episode on the draft combine and how that works as we start thinking about the upcoming rookie draft. Our Los Angeles Angels are going to have the second pick overall, which is why we've had to devote a lot of money in the budget, because clearly we have a big figure that's going to go for the second overall pick in terms of what they're going to be expecting in slot. But we should be able to add, at very worst, our second favorite player in the entire pool of first-year players in a few months. So going to be real important for us to do a good job in the draft combine and get to know a lot more about these players. Looks like that's going to be set to begin on June 7th and run for 5 days. And as I mentioned in our next episode, we will be taking our first look at that new feature of the game. And hopefully it'll help ensure that we make a good decision with who we bring on board. And maybe it'll be someone who will be able to help us at the major league level before this brief experiment with the Los Angeles Angels finishes up. If you've got thoughts on what you would have done differently as we were trying to get this team ready, would love to hear them. Did we perhaps dump Rendon too early? I don't think so. I don't think there's any way we were going to do much better than getting 70% of that contract off the books. As I mentioned, even this time next year, he's still going to be rehabbing and unhealthy, and unlikely that a year older, still wrecked physically and unable to have improved anything on the field, that I think we're going to get materially better terms for him. So my thought was rip the Band-Aid off, get him off the books, and free up a little bit of money for this year to spend on scouting and player development, and free up a little bit of money next year that hopefully we'll be able to use to bring someone on board who can help us more. But always helpful to hear what the worldwide scouting department is thinking, and particularly with a new team like the Angels. I've spent a little bit of time with them now, but not a team that I know a ton about, being on the other side of the country, other than the fact that they've been very disappointing for the last decade, and it is our job to try to change that. Until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.